Hi, I'm Lone Candle. What the hell is going on at Joe Biden's border? First, I should make clear, there is no straight-up open borders policy. True open borders means everyone can legally come to and stay in the U.S. as long as they are not a known security risk. Crossing the border is still illegal unless permission is given or one has the appropriate documentation. Simply calling the border open or Biden's policies open borders is misleading rhetoric. That said, a lot of people are being let in. The border system is broken, and Biden's lighter hand against illegal immigrants and those applying for asylum has encouraged more to come. One method of legal immigration is to come to the United States and claim asylum. People have the right to do this, legally and ethically. If people are going to be killed, but not for living in the U.S., we want them here and have a process for them to live here legally. The problem is, the number of people applying for asylum has skyrocketed. The system requires agents or judges to review people's claims and make a decision on whether they qualify for asylum. This takes time, personnel, and resources. The government just doesn't have the resources to deal with all the asylum seekers. Ideally, Congress would surge resources to help process these people in a reasonable amount of time. But, A, Congress refuses to do that largely because Republicans in the House prefer playing politics over improving the situation right now, and B, it would take time to turn funds into trained personnel who can process migrants. Our leaders have to decide what to do with all the applicants while their cases are being processed. Legally, they are supposed to be detained at least until it's determined that they meet a credible fear of persecution standard. But we don't have the detention capacity for such a mass of people. Even if this was increased a decent amount, the detention capacity still wouldn't suffice. And many asylum seekers are families or unaccompanied children who keeping captive for extended periods of time is arguably unethical. Trump implemented the Migrant Protection Protocols, also known as Remain in Mexico. Under this policy, migrants seeking asylum must remain in Mexico during the entire course of their asylum case. The problem is, conditions near the border in Mexico where migrants stay may be unhealthy and unsafe. The plus is, people have a real disincentive to make weak or false asylum claims because they get no benefit unless their asylum claim is fully accepted. It took time for Biden to end Remain in Mexico due to the courts, but he eventually ended it on June 1st, 2021. He weakened it before this, though. It took a few years for Biden to implement and decide upon the following policies. Biden used at least 4 different tactics in combination to deal with the migrant surge. First, he made it so people who cross the border illegally between ports of entry are quickly removed and are not eligible for asylum unless they meet an exception. Second, using the CBP-1 phone application, migrants can make an appointment to come to an official port of entry and be screened for security threats. Afterwards, they can enter the U.S. and stay there while their case is being decided. For those unable to use the app, they can get an appointment without it. Third, to give people an option other than making the dangerous trek to the U.S., the administration made it possible for people of certain nationalities to apply for parole and then fly to the United States. 30,000 people a month are allowed to come in by this process. A problem is, considerably more people than 30,000 a month want to come. So hopeful migrants may wait a long time before they can get in by this process and therefore still have an incentive to try entering at the border. Fourth and last, The Biden administration is working with other countries in a variety of ways to reduce migration and share the asylee burden. So, Trump's approach was to keep asylum seekers in Mexico for the course of their application, and Biden's approach was to force them to use ports of entry and go through a security screening before letting them wait in the United States while their asylum applications are being processed. Both Biden's and Trump's approaches are essentially broken without more resources and new strategies to speed up the asylum process. For those migrants that have quality asylum cases, we want them living here free from danger and starting to live good lives again. Trump's approach leaves them in Mexico in likely poor conditions for a long time unless applications can be processed more quickly. Biden's approach is better for the migrants who get to live in the U.S. while their cases work their ways through the backlog, but this gives a huge incentive for more people to come and claim asylum, not just those who are truly in danger of persecution, but also economic migrants who are coming for better pay rather than fleeing from persecution. Even if the asylum seekers lose their case, they still get to live in the U.S. for a period of time. After 6 months, they are eligible to work legally and can earn U.S. wages. If they came through a CBP-1 app appointment, they can apply for work authorization right away. Even if they lose their case and eventually get sent home, they get the benefits of living and working in the U.S. for months or years. And it's not clear if they will ever be sent back. It's hard to send people back if they don't volunteer to be removed. And arguably, if they have been here for years and have set down roots, the punishment of removing them from all they have built in this country is not appropriate for the crime of a poor or false asylum claim. The border bill that passed the Senate with bipartisan support and that Republicans killed in the House is not perfect, but it clearly toughens the border and both creates reform and spends resources that would speed up asylum applications. If one wants to make the border tougher, they should have supported that bill. Republicans who want a tougher bill can always argue for that later, at behest of Trump and for political election reasons. House Republicans preferred to try winning the next presidential election rather than helping the border issue right now. So, the bill did not pass. Biden supported the bill. So the bill is a part of Biden's strategy that House Republicans obstructed. Biden's strategy would work better if applications could be processed more quickly with the more resources and reform the bill would provide. Even under a Remain in Mexico strategy, such resources would be helpful. And because it takes time to train personnel, the money should be appropriated by Congress as soon as possible. Solutions. The U.S. should do what it can to make countries that produce asylum seekers better. This should be part of the solution. But the U.S. has little ability to fix other people's countries, so that tool isn't reliable. 3 things the U.S. should do that would effectively help asylum surges are: 1. Reform how we process asylum applications and hire more officers and judges who can process asylum claims. 2. Use a Remain in Mexico policy to deter weak and false asylum claims. 3. Expand legal immigration so less people will have the temptation to immigrate illegally or to make weak or false asylum claims. Speeding up asylum processing is needed for at least 2 reasons. 1. It will limit the incentive for people to abuse asylum. If we allow asylum seekers to wait free in the U.S., the faster we process their claim, the less time they get to spend free and legal in the U.S., so the less incentive they will have to abuse the asylum system. If we try to detain all asylum seekers, faster processing means there will be less people currently waiting and that a higher percentage of asylum seekers can be kept in detention during part or all of their asylum claims. If those thinking of abusing the asylum system know they will be kept in detention, at least while their credible fear designation is being processed, they will have less incentive to make weak or false asylum claims. The second reason we need to speed up asylum is for the humanity of the migrants. For those that have good asylum claims, whether they are in detention, forced to remain in Mexico, or living freely in the United States with the uncertainty of their asylum case hanging over them, their lives will be better if we can hurry up and give them the positive nod on their asylum case and let them live legally and freely in the country. There are at least 3 things we need to do to improve asylum processing. First, we need more agents and judges to work through the claims. Unfortunately, this requires increased funding, which means Congress would have to agree on something and pass it. More judges and agents who can work through asylum claims will help us reduce the time it takes to accept or reject an asylum claim. It's possible that we could create some type of reserve system where we have people trained to work through asylum cases, but they have other jobs outside of surge time. Then, during immigration surges, they take a break from their main jobs or work during their off hours and off days to help clear the backlog. Second, there needs to be a greater emphasis on agents making the call on obviously bad cases so that the slower immigration court system doesn't have to deal with them. This can be done by having more agents trained to make asylum determinations and lowering the bar for them to reject a claim. This has the downside of a higher risk of rejecting a good claim, but with the system overwhelmed, the risk is worth it to get the asylum backlog under control. Third, we need to enforce the third country rule. The U.S. does not need to honor an asylum claim if the asylum seeker passed through a third safe country and was not rejected for asylum by that country. The point to asylum is to give people being persecuted a safe place to live. If someone travels through one or more countries and only asks for asylum in the U.S., at that point, they're an economic migrant because they could have been safe from persecution in the countries they traveled through. We could only apply this rule during surge times, and then allow people from non-border countries to apply for asylum when the backlogs are cleared. Of course, if a migrant can show that they are also being persecuted in the third country, then they can apply for asylum in the U.S. Similarly, we could quickly reject asylum if a seeker could have moved elsewhere in their home country to avoid persecution. Like the third country rule, at that point, they are really economic migrants because they didn't need to leave their home country to escape persecution. Biden has tried to implement some of these strategies that would speed up asylum processing, but to do them effectively requires a boost in funding, and Republicans in Congress have refused to provide this. I'm not a Trump fan, but I think his administration's Remain in Mexico policy was potentially a good idea. If asylum seekers can't live in the U.S. during the course of their asylum claim, if they can't hide in the U.S. after their asylum claim is rejected, if they have to stay in Mexico the whole time unless their asylum claim is accepted, this greatly reduces the incentives for people to make weak or false asylum claims. The main downside to this policy is that conditions in Mexico may be unhealthy and dangerous. Although there is no silver bullet to solving this, the U.S. could work with Mexico to help asylum seekers have better conditions. This would require paying Mexico for them to help with the welfare and security of migrants. Paying Mexico isn't ideal, but it should decrease costs in the long run because it disincentivizes masses of economic migrants from making false or weak asylum claims. One policy that would reduce the number of illegal immigrants and asylum seekers is allowing more legal immigrants. The easier it is for people to get in legally, the less will come illegally, and the less will abuse the asylum process. For those with strong asylum cases who are fleeing for their lives, asylum will still be the most efficient process. But for the rest, legal immigration will be a better option. I often hear people saying about illegal immigrants, they need to come the right way. They need to get proper permission and not disrespect us by breaking our laws. There's some sense to this, but the problem is, for most hopeful immigrants, there is no right way. Their options are coming illegally or not at all. Our immigration system focuses on certain categories of immigrants, like those with high-tech skills, those who can invest a tremendous amount of money in the U.S., and those with close family connections. If you do not fit into an accepted category, your chance of getting into the U.S. is very slim. And, even for these categories, getting in is difficult. For example, for the family ties route, there is such a backlog that your close relative may die before you get accepted as a legal immigrant. For most people, successfully immigrating to the U.S. is more like winning a lottery than doing the proper paperwork and waiting in a reasonable line to get in legally. If one is living a good life and they just think it would be a little better or more fun to live in the U.S., then I would have less sympathy for those who break the law. But for those being persecuted or living in poor economic conditions, they only get one life. Are they going to spend it being persecuted? Are they going to spend it living in poverty? Or are they going to come to a country where they, and especially their children, have a chance to live out their dreams? I understand why someone would cross a line they're not supposed to in order to work hard and live free. And because no large border can ever be 100% secure, it may be worth the risk of death to cross such a border. So, as long as our legal immigration system makes it so daunting for people to immigrate, we will have a lot of illegal immigrants. The more people who can get in legally, the less who come illegally. Those that come legally will for sure not come illegally, but even for those waiting in line, if the line is a reasonable one, they will have less of an incentive to come illegally. Expanding legal immigration isn't a cure-all. Even if we improve the system and allow more people in legally, there will still be more people who want to come here than we will allow legally, and some will choose to come illegally. But expanding legal immigration will likely make for less illegal immigration and will therefore make the border and the asylum process more manageable. Biden supports some expansion in illegal immigration, but doing so with real impact requires an act of Congress. Trump talked about building a big, beautiful gate for legal immigrants, but his administration actually tried to restrict legal immigration. The summary of my main point here. We have a large rush of people claiming asylum. Some of them are good asylum claims. Some are people who want a better life but are not facing actual persecution at home. We don't have the resources committed to processing so many asylum claims. Congress needs to pass funding and reform to speed up the processing. However, by allowing asylum seekers to live in the U.S. while we work through their asylum claims, we are giving a huge incentive for people with false or poor asylum claims to cheat the system and live here by claiming asylum. This makes more people come and makes the surge all the worse. To limit the number of people applying, we need to re-implement Remain in Mexico so people don't get into the U.S. until their asylum claim is approved. We also need to expand legal immigration so less people have to come illegally. Who has been coming to the border in the first place? Almost every region in the world saw an increase in unauthorized immigration to the U.S. Up to year 2014, migrants crossing the border were mostly Mexican men entering for work. Since then, we have a lot of families from a variety of countries coming to the border. There are also a lot of children coming alone and not with their family. Up to 2020, 90% or more of migrants encountered at the southwest border were either from Mexico, Guatemala, El Salvador, or Honduras. In August 2022, for the first time, those countries made up only 49% of those encountered. Many people have been coming from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela due to problems in their home countries. More people from beyond the Americas are also coming to the border. Mexico has the highest number of unauthorized immigrants in the U.S., followed by El Salvador, India, Guatemala, then Honduras. The number of unauthorized Mexicans has been declining due to more leaving than arriving, and, as of 2021, unauthorized populations from Africa, the Caribbean, Central America, and Asia have increased by 47% or more. Populations from Europe, Canada, Oceania, and South America have increased by 30%. Field work in one migrant shelter in Tijuana found immigrants from 45 different countries. Why are they coming? Economic damage from the pandemic, poverty, natural disasters, human rights issues, instability, crime, violence, and war have pushed migrant levels high. Social media is used to give migrants information, false and true, and to organize smuggling operations. The ample jobs in the U.S. and the country's limited ability to quickly process and return migrants are pull factors. Haiti had a very destructive earthquake in 2010 that killed 220,000 people and made 1.5 million homeless. Since then, government functions have fallen apart. The government has been unstable, and gang violence has grown rampant, including the assassination of Haiti's president in 2021. The Dominican Republic, which shares an island with Haiti, has been deporting Haitians en masse. Haitians have had harder times settling in South American and Caribbean countries compared to Venezuelans, due partially to racial profiling. Honduras has a homicide rate of 38 per 100,000 people. A woman is killed every 36 hours. Gangs demand money from people, and if they don't receive it, they kill you. Over 7.7 million people have fled Venezuela since its economic collapse. The Western Hemisphere has never had a larger displacement crisis, and it is the largest worldwide migrant exodus today. The majority have gone to other South American countries. Many, however, are heading toward the U.S., either after living in those countries or coming straight from Venezuela. So, essentially, people are coming either or both because they expect to find work in the U.S. or because they fear for their safety back home. Today, many are applying for asylum, while before they were mainly here to work. Many may be applying for asylum even though they are really here to work. Part of the influx is that migrants believe they have a better chance of entering the country under Biden than under Trump. Smugglers and social media have sometimes exaggerated the chances of getting into the U.S., but undocumented immigrants do have a better chance of nicer treatment under Biden than Trump, so Biden's lighter policy has caused more immigrants to try coming. Migrants have told reporters that they believed that entering and staying in the U.S. would be easier under Biden than Trump. Why do they come illegally? The U.S. legal immigration system is backlogged. A. We are behind on processing people's applications. B. Only a limited amount of people are allowed in each year, and there are far more people who want to come than the number allowed in. Fewer than 1% of those who would like to move to the U.S. can do so legally. There are limited ways one can legally immigrate and a limited number of slots. One's chances of getting accepted for legal immigration are low. Getting accepted is more like winning a lottery than waiting in line. For many hopeful immigrants, legal immigration is so unlikely to seem like no option at all. With such a system, the options are illegal immigration or no immigration at all. If someone lives among violence and or poverty, no immigration is a horrible option. Since 1990, the only way someone outside the United States can gain a green card is one of 5 ways: qualify as a refugee, win the diversity lottery, family sponsorship, which has very long lines so that most sponsors will die before they can get their relatives in, except for spouses and minor children, employment-based self-sponsorship for people in very special circumstances like those who have work of national importance or who can invest a minimum of $800,000 in the U.S., and employer sponsorship that requires a lot of red tape and is restricted to mostly those with college degrees and has low caps. The administration has increased labor migration pathways for Central Americans by offering seasonal, agricultural, and non-agricultural employment visas, increasing these from 275,000 in 2020 to 422,000 in 2022. This isn't permanent immigration because temporary and seasonal work visas are temporary. Asylum. If someone reaches the U.S. border, they can claim that they cannot return to their homeland because they fear persecution on account of race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or political opinion. If their claims are determined to be correct, they can legally stay in the U.S. This is asylum. Separate from asylum, migrants can also receive protection from torture if they can show that it is more likely than not that they would be tortured if removed. Refugees and asylees gain their protected legal status through the 1951 United Nations Convention relating to the status of refugees, the UN Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhumane, or Degrading Treatment or Punishment, and U.S. law. If granted asylum, asylees can become lawful permanent residents after 1 year. U.S. asylum consists of two paths, affirmative and defensive. Generally, if one is caught entering the country illegally or is found in the U.S. and put into removal proceedings, then one can defensively claim asylum in an attempt to avoid removal. People who apply for asylum while not being removed are on the affirmative asylum path. Whether defensive or affirmative, asylum must be applied for within 1 year of entering the country. U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services processes affirmative cases. Judges from the Executive Office for Immigration review defensive cases. The first received 431,000 applications in fiscal year 2023, and the latter received 316,000. Both numbers are record-breaking. Each application can cover multiple people. Unaccompanied children have less rules for claiming asylum. For example, they don't have to file within 1 year of arriving. Credible fear is a significant possibility that a person could establish eligibility for asylum. Asylum seekers can be rejected by asylum officers if they don't first meet this lower barrier. In court, asylum applicants need to show a reasonable possibility of past persecution or well-founded fear of persecution in the future due to a protected reason, race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or political opinion. The Trump administration said gang and gender-based violence does not fall under social group persecution. The Biden administration overturned that in 2021. The current asylum laws were passed in the 1980s and 1990s. At the time, most applying for asylum flew into the country, while people who came by way of the border were economic migrants from Mexico who did not claim asylum. Not funding the system properly and not updating its laws are long-term reasons behind today's problems. Asylum cases are massively backlogged. Most asylum seekers are released into the country to await the outcome of their asylum case because there are not enough resources to hold and speedily investigate their cases, or even to screen them for eligibility. Starting in June 2022, Biden allowed asylum officers to settle asylum claims rather than just make the determination of credible fear. By skipping court, this could shorten the process to months rather than years. However, this rule was paused in May 2023 due to lack of resources and needing to free up officials for the ending of Title 42. It started again in October 2023, but limited resources means it won't be used too often. Normally, migrants cannot gain a work permit until 180 days after applying for asylum. Applying for a work permit is a separate application. So, people can come here, claim asylum, and then work legally until the asylum system rules on their case. For those with weak or false asylum claims, the asylum system is working like a work permit system, just one with a 180-day delay. If one crossed using a CBP-1 app appointment, they can apply for a work permit right away. Parole is an action done by the executive branch whereby immigrants can be granted temporary legal status to stay in the U.S. This is a different parole than parole in the criminal justice system. Biden is using parole in 3 major ways. One works with the asylum process. Once an asylum seeker has passed a credible fear test, they are often allowed to live in the country until their asylum claim is fully resolved. They are paroled into the country. This has been done since at least January 2010. A second way works with those who make CBP-1 appointments. Those who enter the country by way of a CBP-1 appointment are given 2 years of parole. A third process is humanitarian parole for nationals of certain countries. If there is high demand to come to the U.S. because of a problem in home countries, the president can parole large numbers of people from specific countries into the U.S. to live here temporarily. Currently, there is a humanitarian parole program for Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans that allows up to 30,000 people collectively from these nationalities into the country each month. From Title 42 to Title 8, Biden's policies. Title 42 was used under Trump to immediately remove undocumented immigrants from the United States. It is a pandemic rule justified by the potential threat of immigrants spreading COVID-19. While it's not clear if it was helpful in limiting the spread of COVID, the pandemic was its legal justification, so the process needed to end after COVID deaths were under control. Biden continued Title 42 expulsions until May 2023. The ending of Title 42, combined with high levels of undocumented immigrants, posed a huge challenge because the normal way of processing immigrants is more resource intensive because they have to be properly processed. With the end of Title 42, Biden's plan was to essentially encourage people to come in orderly, recognizable ways by entering at official ports of entry rather than crossing the border illegally. The administration has used expedited removal processes to remove illegal border crossers and subject them to a 5-year ban on reentry and presume that illegal border crossers are ineligible for asylum unless they have an exception. Instead of using Title 42 to expeditiously remove illegal border crossers, the administration will use Title 8, which is the standard procedure. Orderly and lawful pathways include expanding parole for Venezuelans, Nicaraguans, Haitians, and Cubans, tripling or doubling refugee resettlement from the Western Hemisphere, using the CBP-1 phone application for people to have appointments to enter at ports of entry and start a protection claim, and working with other countries in the region, Canada, and Spain to expand legal pathways into those countries. The administration has also provided more humanitarian aid to Mexico and Central America. As part of this plan, the administration claims they are surging federal resources and personnel to help deal with illegal crossers. They claim that without increased funding and reform from Congress, the immigration system will be broken and they can only do so much. The administration also planned on having a family reunification parole process for certain countries. Additionally, the administration is working with countries to stop smuggling and to target criminal networks in the Darien, and is trying to fight misinformation from smugglers that convince people to migrate illegally. The administration expects asylum seekers to wait in Mexico until they can make an appointment at a port of entry using the CBP-1 app. It can be used for regular asylum or to seek special parole for eligible nationalities. Migrants are assumed ineligible for asylum according to the Circumvention of Lawful Pathways rule, unless they were approved for a DHS-approved parole process, they used CBP-1 to make an appointment or came to a port of entry and gave a good reason why they could not use the CBP-1 app, or they were denied asylum in a third country on the way to the U.S. Exemptions to avoid having their asylum claims denied unless they make an appointment include medical emergencies, unaccompanied children, and being Mexican. The rule is based on asylum seekers not having legitimate asylum claims if they could have applied for asylum in a country on the way to the U.S. Mexicans did not pass through a third country, so their asylum cases have to be considered by law. At a port of entry appointment, the migrant is screened for security and then can be paroled into the United States while their case is processed. They are expected to show up to the removal proceedings. These policies have increased the use of ports of entry. In the financial year 2021, 4% of illegal immigrant encounters at the southwest border happened at ports of entry. In financial year 2023, 17% did. Having people who wish to request asylum come to ports of entry makes things more orderly and reduces the power of smuggling organizations. Critics of using the third safe country idea are concerned that transit countries may not really be safe third countries because they have weak asylum systems and such seekers face violence and discrimination. Additionally, asylum seekers in other countries may have barriers to healthcare, education, and employment. Unfortunately, Biden's plan can only be so successful because the Department of Homeland Security has too little resources to effectively implement border policies. 1. There are not enough officers and judges to process asylum claims. So there is a huge backlog and people have to wait a long time before their cases are resolved. 2. There are not enough resources to give people speedy CBP-1 appointments, so many migrants choose to illegally cross the border rather than wait. Way more people come than the Border Patrol has detention space, so that's why migrants are so quickly paroled. Many migrants today turn themselves into officials and ask for asylum. The U.S. system was not designed to screen masses of migrants coming across the border for credible fear. When Congress made the last law in 1996, they expected most people coming across the border to be people just looking for work, not claiming asylum. At the time, most asylum claims came from people who flew into airports. In financial year 2023, ICE had 6.3 million cases of non-detained migrants. They had 2.8 million in financial year 2022. Both check-ins and alternatives to detention technology, like restricted use cell phones and ankle monitors, are used to keep track of people. ICE has trouble using technology in many cases because of court orders and limited resources. In 2019, DHS had the capacity to hold an average daily population of 55,000. For financial year 2023, the Biden administration requested a reduction of that capacity to 25,000. Due to DHS overcapacity and their inability to work most cases in a reasonable amount of time, the administration has preferred getting people the ability to work legally while they wait for their case to be decided. Humanitarian parole and temporary protected status give people this. So does extending validity periods for work permits given to asylum seekers. Due to heavy demand, the Venezuelan, Haitian, Cuban, Nicaraguan parole program has a 4-year wait period. On average, asylum cases have a 4.3-year wait. Some cases may not be seen for 10 years. Regional processing centers located in foreign countries have at times closed their online portals because they had too much demand. Congressional research has said that to finish the case backlog by 2032 would require 700 additional immigration judges, more than twice the current number. Customs and Border Protection has asked for 1,300 more Border Patrol officers. Almost 40% of them are being used to process migrants rather than to secure the border. Technology could be upgraded. For example, AI-monitored watchtowers could watch a lot of land automatically. More regional processing centers could be built to give more opportunities for migrants to apply for asylum without coming to the border. Despite a lack of resources, DHS has been trying. They have built some additional detention capacity and have increased their rate of completing credible fear cases. They reached at least 4,000 a week, twice as many as the previous high. In April 2023, DHS started doing some credible fear interviews in facilities at the border without giving the migrants to ICE for detention. This process is faster. From May 12, 2023 to September 20, 2023, DHS removed or returned over 253,000 people. The number for 2019 was 180,000. These removals required agreements with multiple countries to streamline returns and for Mexico to accept many non-Mexicans. The administration has started building some parts of the border wall. They said they did this because a law passed by Congress during the Trump presidency required its construction. Biden increased protections for people from Venezuela, but also resumed deporting them. Biden's plan is one of deterrence with potential benefits for those who come through home country parole programs or ports of entry, and penalties for those who cross illegally. However, penalties for crossing illegally incentivizes smugglers to take more dangerous routes across the border in order to not get caught. And this has historically resulted in more migrant deaths. In January 2023, the administration announced that it would create a pathway for up to 30,000 people a month from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela to be paroled to the U.S. This program is combined with more restricted access to asylum for migrants at the border for people from these countries. The U.S. also began expelling more migrants from these countries to Mexico. To be paroled, individuals have to have a sponsor in the U.S. and pass a background check. People are ineligible for this parole if they crossed into Panama, Mexico, or the United States without authorization after the program was announced for their nationality. The plan was to expel up to the same amount of people as are let in through parole. These expulsions happened under Title 42, so I'm not sure if these expulsions are still happening now that Title 42 has ended. This plan was first started for only Venezuelans in October 2022, and it receives far more applications than slots available. Migrants who are processed using CBP-1 and humanitarian parolees are eligible for work authorization. Regular asylum applicants who did not come in through CBP-1 have to wait 6 months due to the law. In October 2023, DHS granted temporary protected status to the 472,000 Venezuelans who arrived before July 31, 2023. Others were also given TPS. There has never been more TPS holders, 698,000 in September 2023. In December 2022, Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans were 40% of people stopped at the border. By March, they were 3%. It seems the carrot and stick of parole and tougher border asylum policies worked, at least in the short run. A group of processes have given 2.5 million people twilight statuses. These statuses do not have a path to permanent residence, so applying for asylum may be their best option. Different sponsorship parole programs allow U.S. citizens and lawful permanent residents to ask for specific migrants to enter the country. The sponsor has to provide for them financially. Biden has offered new TPS for 6 countries: Afghanistan, Cameroon, Ethiopia, Myanmar, Ukraine, and Venezuela, and extended it for 10 others. The administration has also given extended deferred enforced departure for some people from Hong Kong and Liberia, and the government has granted other people deferred action. The current system was not designed to deal with so many asylum applicants and so many families and children. Biden ended detaining families in 2021. Instead of detaining families like Bush, Obama, and Trump had done, Biden chose to monitor them with ankle bracelets and other methods. In May 2023, DHS created the Family Expedited Removal Management Program to deal with migrant families. In financial year 2023, 822,000 people arrived at the southwest border in families. 561,000 arrived in the financial year 2022. Under this program, ICE electronically monitors families and processes them once they arrive at their intended location. Families that don't show a credible fear of persecution or torture are removed. Thanks to limited resources, the program has not had a large impact. The head of household gets an ankle monitor and has a curfew. Families get a credible fear screening within 6 to 12 days, and if officials determine that families do not have credible fear, they are removed. If there is credible fear, they can file for asylum. This program has only processed 1,600 families as of February 2024. There were 621,000 family unit encounters between ports of entry in fiscal year 2023. The administration also allowed family members who already have family sponsorship applications to come to the U.S. under parole while they wait for a green card. By January 2024, 3,000 people came by this path. In September 2023, the administration announced that it would change protocols to remove more families. Refugees. There is a set limit to the number of refugees the U.S. allows in a year. There is not a set limit to the number of asylees. The refugee limit is set by the president after a consultation with Congress. Trump cut the number of refugees. Biden is increasing them again. In financial year 2023, 60,000 refugees were resettled, an increase but still less than the 85,000 resettled in Obama's last year. The number of refugees in financial year 2024 will likely be higher than 85,000. Under Trump in financial year 2021, only 11,411 refugees were allowed in. The Americas has not normally been a refugee priority. Biden is making it more of one. The administration has improved the refugee resettlement system, allowing for more admissions and faster processing. Weaker enforcement. On January 20, 2021, Biden's first day in office, he paused deportations for 100 days, limited the types of illegal immigrants that ICE could target by focusing on violent criminals, stopped border wall construction, and started trying to end Remain in Mexico. Comparing financial year data from 2017, 18, and 19 to 2021, 22, and 23 shows a 57% decrease in arrests of criminal aliens, a 68% drop in at-large arrests, a 44% decrease in detainer requests issued on criminal aliens, that deportations fell by 67%, and that immigration-related criminal convictions fell by 55%. These data are for aliens with known criminal histories. If the administration's interior enforcement is focusing on aliens with criminal histories, then why are all of these down? 2021 ICE data showed that ICE arrested 48% fewer criminals, deported 63% fewer criminals, and issued 46% fewer detainer requests to other law enforcement agencies in financial year 2021 compared to 2020. ICE's enforcement and removal operations data showed that the removal of convicts was down 62%. In September 2021, the administration issued guidelines allowing law enforcement to only target illegal immigrants who are a threat to safety and security. In March 2022, DHS announced that it would no longer use expedited removals for immigrants in the country for 2 years or less. Under Trump, ICE could find some people here illegally for 2 years or less and remove them without seeing an immigration judge. If they claimed fear, the ICE officer could administer a credible fear of persecution test and remove them if they fail. Now, these illegal immigrants in the country would have to go through the immigration court system before they can be removed. Biden had a variety of policies that, compared to Trump, make it more likely that someone who illegally crossed the border or someone applying for asylum could make it into the country and live here outside of confinement, and that make it less likely that someone in the country illegally would be deported. Weaker enforcement may be good on humanitarian grounds, but it encourages more immigrants to come illegally. The numbers of people from around the world trying to get into the U.S. has gotten enormous. The problem isn't just the numbers, but the diversity of sending countries, the number of families, and the variety of protection needs creates a huge challenge for border officials who work with limited resources and outdated laws. Court mandates, lawsuits, and litigation threats also limit what the administration can do. Staffing and infrastructure are so limited that when Biden rolls out plans to alleviate the border, the numbers these new processes affect are small. There's a huge backlog in immigration courts due to a chronic underfunding. To speed up the backlog would take many more judges, which means a lot of money. Hiring more Border Patrol agents isn't easy. Border Patrol agents need extensive background checks and must pass difficult physical tests. Border Patrol jobs are remote at the southwest border. Why work there when a cop can work in any city in the country? 65% of Border Patrol applicants fail their lie detector tests. That's higher than people of other federal law enforcement agencies. There's also likely to be a surge in retirements in the next few years. This isn't to say that hiring more agents is impossible, but that it's challenging, and we should get the money appropriated by Congress as soon as possible so we can start working on the recruiting challenges. Managing the border is difficult because it has surge management issues, meaning the number of resources needed varies greatly over the years depending on how many migrants are coming at the time. The number of migrants can quickly rise, while the number of agents, realistically, cannot. The U.S. military manages surge by using a surge system, the National Guard and Reserve Forces. Maybe the Border Patrol should have a reserve force. Reserve judges, too. Getting more resources to the border is a catch-22 politically. We can't get reform passed partly because surges at the border get everyone too scared of wild immigration to do proper reform. We have surges at the border partially because immigration law is out of date and needs to be reformed. The bill that passed the Senate as a bipartisan compromise and was supported by the Border Patrol Union, but was rejected by House Republicans at Trump's request, would reform the asylum system so that it works faster, hire up to 4,300 more asylum officers, require greater proof to gain refuge, give presidents the power to close the border by immediately expelling all incoming illegal border crossers when the border is overwhelmed with asylum claims, increase funding for protecting the border, increase detention capacity, provide $1.4 billion for states and localities to help with migrants, force the president to build certain border barriers, create 250,000 new visas for workers or those who want to unite with family members, appropriate $48 billion toward fighting fentanyl and drugs, make those who apply for asylum eligible to work while they wait for their case to conclude, extend protection dreamers get from their parents' visas for at least 8 years, and increase the speed of naturalization for foreign nationals who are honorably discharged from the U.S. military. If daily illegal crossings reached 5,000 average daily migrants over a 7-day period, or 8,500 on a single day, DHS would be required to shut down the border. However, unaccompanied minors from Mexico and Canada would not count toward these totals. The border could only reopen if encounters fell to 75% of the number that caused the closing. DHS could also optionally shut down the border if the crossing's daily average went over 4,000 a day for 7 days. This emergency authority would sunset in 3 years. During a shutdown, border crossers would be deported immediately, with exceptions for minors and those who qualify for the UN Convention Against Torture. Non-Mexican unaccompanied children would be exempted. Asylum requests from people at legal ports of entry would still be considered, and the government must have the capacity to take in 1,400 asylum applicants at ports of entry during a shutdown. People who arrive at ports of entry may wait for processing in the U.S. rather than be detained. Those who enter illegally and who ask for asylum would be more likely to be detained than under current law. Families would be an exception to detention. The bill would require virtually all asylum seekers encountered at the border to be expeditiously removed or placed in a process where they can come into the United States and be monitored. Then the government would have 90 days to do a fear screening where the officers can grant or deny protections, or move them on to a full merits interview. Those given protection, moved to a merits interview, or who were not interviewed in 90 days, would become eligible for work permits. These determinations would be made by asylum officers rather than immigration courts. Most new asylum cases would be heard by asylum officers working for the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services and DHS rather than immigration judges under the Department of Justice. This process would mostly be non-adversarial. This would be faster than immigration courts. Asylum claims could be rejected for disqualifying criminal history, if they were living safely in a third country before coming for asylum, or if they could move to a different part of their home country and be safe. The bill would provide funds for ICE to keep at least 50,000 detention beds. From 2021 through 2023, 34,000 were available. Also, immigrants with a U.S. citizen, spouse, or fiancé, or with a parent whose spouse or fiancé is a U.S. citizen, would be eligible to work. Having two different sets of rules, depending on whether the border is shut down or not, could be confusing for both border control agents and migrants. Smugglers could exploit the confusion. They could encourage people to migrate now because the border may shut down soon. Overall, the bill would have toughened the border and sped up the asylum process while providing more funding for the country to deal with the border surge. If one wanted an overall tougher border, it would make sense to vote for the bill. Even if one wanted a stronger bill, that could always be pushed for later and campaigned on. Rather than helping the issue right now, House Republicans chose to keep the border weaker so they can use it as a campaign issue in the next election, and so Biden wouldn't be seen as trying to help the border by signing related legislation. Republicans are right that Biden has been weaker on the border than Trump. Biden's enforcement has dropped below levels I consider optimal, and Remain in Mexico was a good idea to discourage false asylum claims. However, this is no excuse not to vote for the bill. That Biden could have done a better job and that this bill is a step in the right direction can both be true. Also, while the surge is partially caused by Biden's weaker enforcement, it is also caused by the perception of Biden opening borders. This perception is hard to fight. The ability of the U.S. to influence communication in foreign countries is limited. There wasn't much Biden could do about this other than be just as strict on the border as Trump, but that would require being tough to an extent that Biden and I find unethical. Even if Biden was as tough as I would have wanted him to be, there would likely be a surge because Trump would have been tougher, and the gap in toughness was bound to get exaggerated by those hopeful for a new start in a free and prosperous country, and by smugglers who make money off of people illegally migrating. So, while the surge is partially Biden's fault due to weaker immigration policies, it largely couldn't be helped unless he could maintain a perception of being as tough on the border as Trump, which isn't possible unless Biden supported everything Trump did and talked aggressively and crudely about immigrants like Trump does. And either way, the failed bill would have toughened the border, so it would make sense to vote for it unless one desires a weaker border or one wants to put politics over a stronger border. Concluding thoughts. In a magic unicorn rainbow happy land, everyone who wanted to come to the U.S. could come. There would be no need to screen for security. There would be no need to worry about financially supporting those who can't support themselves. No need to worry about competitive pressures such a massive influx would have on American jobs. And no need to worry about so many people assimilating into the dynamic and freedom-loving culture of the United States. But we live in the real world. And in the real world, these are all legitimate concerns. So we have to have limits on how many people can immigrate in a year. We need to prioritize who comes based on the needs of potential migrants, the needs of the United States, and the needs of individual Americans. As long as the U.S. limits the number of legal immigrants, as long as other countries face social and natural disasters, and as long as the U.S. is more prosperous than other countries, there will be lots of people willing to take the risks of migrating illegally. Such people should be treated with compassion. But because we live in the real world that contains real threats from such immigration, the U.S. must also be tough and discourage illegal immigration while simultaneously considering the humanity of the migrants. Partisan bickering, as well as politicians, activists, and reflexive citizens caring more about winning an argument or an election than improving policy, has made immigration reform incredibly difficult to get through Congress. We need reform in all parts of the system, not just asylum. Such reform should focus on increasing legal immigration in such a way that benefits the U.S. by providing the people and skills that it needs to be an even more prosperous country, while also being tough and compassionate toward illegal immigrants and asylum seekers. On asylum, I would actually fund Biden's strategies that seek to reject the asylum claims of those that cross illegally while greatly speeding up the processing of those who enter at official ports of entry. With proper funding, efficiently working through asylum claims would discourage weak and false claims because those people would be quickly removed from the country while those with good claims would sooner get the protection they need. Trump also had a good idea. Remain in Mexico forces asylum seekers to wait in Mexico while we work through their case. This discourages false claims because asylum seekers won't get to live and work in the U.S. while their claim is worked. And if their claim is rejected, we won't need to search for them and remove them if they refuse to leave. Such a policy would require working with Mexico to increase the safety and health of their situation while waiting in Mexico, and may only be necessary during times of heavy asylum applications. With expanded legal immigration, the resources and reform to more quickly process asylum claims, and a remain in Mexico policy, the overwhelmed asylum system would be improved. Well, I'm Lone Candle. Like me? Comment me? Love me. And look, you don't have to be romantically in love with me, but you should love me to the extent that, you want to be my slave. Because look, I'm against me being a slave, and I'm against people being a slave based on race. But I'm for me owning slaves, just because it'd be cool, to not have to do anything and just have people do things for me. I mean, I think that's unethical, but if I could just become a sociopath or a psychopath, I'd be pro-slavery. So I'm not saying I want you to be my slave, because deep down I think that's wrong. But deep down, maybe nihilism's correct. So when I say love me, I mean get down on your knees and ask me what you want me to do. Ask me what I want you to do. And then I'll tell you, and you do it. Okay? And depending on your skills, I'll give you a skill-based related task. So anyways, get to loving me and doing whatever I tell you to do. And I think the world will be a better place. For me.